All right, so today we have, if you want to introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Kent Paulson, the artistic director of the Dudley Bird Chorale, and this is...
I'm Josh Fields, the assistant to Kent and the Dudley Bird Chorale.
Right.
We're here to discuss a little bit about our upcoming Songs of Healing and Hope concert.
Fantastic.
You're gonna give us some backstory, some inspiration, some trivia, and what have you.
We frequently in the office talk about all sorts of esoteric things and what people hear in music and why they like the music that they like and what's going on and what composers and musicians are thinking. And we thought, let's just sit down and record some of that and share that with you as if you were here conversing with us. So if you have any comments or questions or thoughts or discussions on music, feel free to email us or whatever you do on social media things.
Comment, like, share, subscribe, all the buzzwords.
Comment, like, share. Okay.
So Songs of Healing and Hope, this is our second one we've ever done. So what's the underlying theme? What's the inspiration for the title and how that ties to the concert overall?
That's a great question. So this is the chorale's 48th season, and it started with a mass to celebrate the transition to eternal life of a Norbertine priest back in 1970-something when the chorale started. And so we've always done an All Saints Day concert. And after a couple of years off with the pandemic, it just felt like we wanted to broaden that even more to talk about the healing and hope that people are looking for as they go through the struggles and challenges of life, both in the grief and sadness that we experience as people pass, but also in the anxiety, uncertainty of things that are going on. So really kind of picking music that's about thinking a little bit beyond yourself. What are we doing here? How do we deal with grief and sadness, and where do we find hope, and how do we look for things and different types of music that go along with that?
Yeah, and obviously, being a community choir, we have this large gathering of unique individuals, so it's kind of meta in the sense that we're all getting together for this healing process and this gathering of hope.
Right. It's sort of like songs that the composers wrote for their own healing sometimes, or songs that to me have inspired hope or healing, and then we go through that process as the choir to rehearse them and digging into what do we think the composer was thinking? What were they feeling? Why did they write this? What are you thinking? What are you feeling as you go through this, besides, will I ever get my notes right and things like that? And then what the audience will experience. Above my desk is a little sign that was given to me by my favorite conducting professor that says, I look at it every day. I should hopefully I can remember it.
I say you can look at it right now, too.
See where it is. So the composer says to the conductor, do you hear what I hear? And the conductor says to the choir, do you hear what I hear? And the choir in performance says to the audience, do you hear what I hear? And then the audience says back to the composer, we heard what you heard. And it's sort of this cycle. I've seen something like that for the visual arts too. It's going to, do you see what I see? It's sort of that idea of why we do music, besides the music that we listen to just for fun, or it's got a good beat and you can dance to it, that type of stuff. So
that's a really nice, succinct way to kind of sum up the whole process. So speaking of that, we've only had rehearsals now twice at the time of filming this. What piece or pieces or sections or movements, what's jumping out at you right now that is just already impressing you and you're looking forward to sharing with audiences?
Yeah, and those are great questions, because I know you are also a musician, but you come from not the choral or the church music background in any way. It's kind of like a metal, what your different genres of metal music, but as a drummer,
yes.
Whatever. So I've been thinking a lot about the Bernstein Chichester Psalms. So Leonard Bernstein, one of the most famous American conductors, composers, pianists, performers, and I've always been drawn to Leonard Bernstein, but I've been thinking of him and his influence a lot recently because Stephen Sondheim recently passed away, who's also
Timely.
kind of my hero model emulating type of person in musical theater, and Bernstein and Sondheim were close friends and worked together, in the seminal work in music theater, West Side Story. And so as we talked about Sondheim this summer, I was remembering that some of the music that Bernstein wrote for West Side Story and ended up getting cut out became the basis for part of the Chichester Psalms.
Interesting.
And so,
okay.
As we've been rehearsing it, I'm reminded how much I love the music, but how complex and dense it is. So it's really gotten me thinking a lot about that things can be challenging and beautiful, but they can also be frustrating. And the whole piece seems to be this tension between trying to find peace and balance.
So before you get further, I want to ask. You say it's dense and difficult. What do you mean? Is that like the text itself is difficult? The structure of the music? Is there a lot of polyphonic aspects?
All of those things. So
Okay.
Bernstein wrote this in 1965, and he decided to set texts. Bernstein was an American, but he's also Jewish. And this is at the time when Israel had just become a nation for the first time after thousands of years, 1948. There's a lot of conflicts. 2 years later is going to be the 6-Day War, the 7-Day War, or whatever that is, the Arab-Israeli conflict. And so he sets a couple psalms from the Old Testament, which is his heritage, but he chose to write them use the original Hebrew. So that's a difficult challenge for the choir.
Proper diction.
Learning to pronounce something, and we're using a transliteration, which is so they've taken the Hebrew sounds and put them in the kind of the English alphabet. But
Okay.
still, if it's not from the same language family, like it's easier for English native speakers to be able to sing in Latin or Italian or Spanish, and to a lesser degree French and German, because the way the language is constructed sounds more like our own, so it doesn't feel difficult to get through into the mouth. The other thing is that Bernstein, as a composer, he just always seems to have this complicated, dense contrast. So a lot of normal melodies, like one of the other pieces we're doing, the Foray Requiem, it's this beautiful line up and beautiful line down. That's sort of the traditional way. And Bernstein loves these melodies that jump all over. You think of his most famous song from West Side Story. It's like, so it's really much more angular up and down, which fits great with the text. He also has a very progressive harmonic language, so there's a lot of sevenths.
Okay.
So, normally we'd have things like that, but he's got a lot of.
Okay.
So a lot of sevenths, and that's metaphorical for the 7, which is a sort of a holy number in ancient,
yes, okay.
In the Jewish tradition and in the Christian tradition, the 7 days is holiness and things like that. So he's got a lot of it's just really complicated things, and not so much polyphonics, but there's a lot of times where like the second movement of the Bernstein, it's really poignant. The women are singing, or the sopranos and altos are singing, the Lord is my shepherd, the Psalm 23, which we always associate with funerals and peace and calm, and images of mountains and still waters and peaceful rest. But underneath, the basses and tenors are singing something accompanied by like bass drum, which is why are the nations always at war? And so there's this lower and much more rhythmic, and there's times where the bass drum just kind of like out of peace and quiet just smacks it. It sounds like a cannon fire. And so there's the added element of, if we want to get technical in music.
Slightly, yes.
Yeah, most normal church hymns, pop tunes on the radio, choral music thing just has 4 counts. The 1, 2, 3, 4. And Bernstein, the first movement, which we're not doing, is in 7. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2. And then the third movement, which is also beautiful, is in 10, two groups of five, so it's like 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3.
Don't want to go off on a tangent here, but why wouldn't someone just simply say it's in 5 instead of 10? Is it just due to the nature of how the phrasing is written?
Yeah, that I didn't ask Leonard that.
If we could get him on the phone, if anybody can contact him.
There's a lot of in the text. There's a lot of symmetry that's meant to be parallel. So it's like Adonai, and things that go back and forth. So it's just you have a language that you're not as familiar with. And a beautiful construction, but it doesn't flow in the same way that other music that you're more used to does. But yet it's one of the more beautiful pieces. And then the beauty is setting it up then for the third movement. You've got all of these things of tension and trying to find balance. And at the very end, he sets the Hine Matov, which is a very traditional line from one of the Psalms, I think 133 or something. That
sounds right.
How beautiful it is when, well, the old translation is brethren dwell in unity. After all of this peace mixed in with anxiety and war and violence, at the end he says, he takes the word dwell together in unity, and the very last note, everyone, the orchestra, the choir, is all on the exact same note. There is no harmony. There's just one note that just floats peacefully at the end. And so it's sort of like the beauty of that is that the unity emerges from not avoiding the conflict, but leaning into the tension and singing those difficult intervals and difficult rhythms to create the sense that when we get there, there's a completeness to that final chord.
That's astute. Yeah, that's a really good description, and I think I don't need to point it out, but I think that's probably one of the centerpieces of the concert. That idea of working through the stress and anxiety with our people around us,
right? And even if you think of it in the sense of like the All Saints, or a lot of the texts of the other songs deal with grief or loneliness or missing things. You think of people in your own life that there's that tension between they're more at peace now that they've gone, but we miss them more. So there's kind of that tension and balance, and I think those are terms that Bernstein used a lot. I was influenced. It's still one of my fun things to do is go back and watch Bernstein's young orchestra concerts or young people's concerts, where he was really one of the first people to kind of say, let's explain what's happening in music. It's the way, for a lot of people going to classical music or a choir concert or orchestra concert, it's kind of how I feel going into an art museum. Oh, that's a lovely painting. I have no idea about depth and color and light and dark and perspective and, and the texture but when I hear someone who's an artist explain those things to me, it really changes the experience. So we try to do that a lot in rehearsal, try to dig through those things. But you also have the practical sense of no matter how much you talk about Bernstein, you still have to practice melodies that are jumping all over and harmonies that are complex and difficult.
Yeah. Absolutely awesome. I'm going to use my cheat sheet here. I don't want to give any spoilers away, but with this really penultimate and this like final, not penultimate, but the final notes in this Bernstein piece, is that going to be the concert closer?
Well, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but no.
It just seems so fitting,
Sometimes you program a concert like a show with kind of a narrative arc.
Yeah.
But sometimes, and this is the practical sense, you wait until you've been rehearsing things, and whatever's going to sound best you end with, and if something's not quite as good, maybe you stick it in the middle somewhere.
Okay, so it's not off the table. It's not a deliberate choice to leave it.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
But
fair.
Usually, as I like, abstract and metaphorical and kind of this amorphous mist of drifting into a concert. But I've also been a part of concerts where you end so subtly that no one claps because they didn't know it was over. So we also have some other pieces that might have a little bit more of a da 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 boom, a bang to them that kind of and I think I view the progression of the Bernstein going from all of this. Well, the second movement starts with one of the best introductions. Musicians, composers write, sing this song allegro, which is medium, relatively fast, or flowing, or smoothly, or separated.
Nothing like not giving you a specific
Right.
BPM. Love it.
Bernstein, at the beginning of the second movement of the Chichester Psalms, has the best description ever. It says, blissfully unaware of threat. So you have the Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, going on, and underneath you have the battles of war happening underneath it. And that sets up for that final chord of just everything smooth and unity. But I kind of conceive of that as the part of the healing, and that really the hope is going to be in some of the other songs that we have. So
Nice. That's so foreign to, again, from my world, I'm like, okay, we have a song here. It is this many beats per minute. This is the tempo. This is the time signature. But then you've got this ambiguous, blissfully unaware.
Right.
Interesting.
It's sort of like, one of the things we talk about a lot with students is you prepare them for thinking about the arts, whether that's dance or visual arts or music or things like that, is if you were going to describe a sunset, you could describe it in a very specific physical sense. The Earth's rotation was moving at this speed and at 7:14 p.m. according to this time zone. The amount of light reflection,
Scientific almost.
Yeah. Or you could say time seemed to stand still as if I was remembering the peace of my youth.
Okay.
Or you could say, I saw in the gradual shift from day to night, the shift that happened to me as I hit the middle of my life. So there's so many different ways to describe that. And so I think one of the things I love about the songs in this concert is they're all kind of around that theme of loss and remembering and hope. But the texts imply just such completely different ways of constructing music. So
awesome. I think for folks that will come to the concert will maybe not know to the fullest extent, the nooks and crannies that we're discussing now, but I think they will still be impacted by it nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things you always think about as a performer is doing music that, it's kind of like not everyone is a trained classical musician. So you go to a symphony concert and you're like, I don't necessarily have to understand the music theory that's happening behind it. I don't have to understand why the composer did that. But that's the job of the artist, or the conductor, the singers, is we all have our own experience with Bernstein. So it's not my job to make any of the singers think about Bernstein the same way that I do, or think about what the text of Psalm 23 means. As long as they're having experience, then for the audience experiences the symbiotic viewing of experiencing one way of looking at the world while everyone else is also having their own experience. It's sort of like, rather than, when you listen to the Bernstein Chichester Psalms, if you don't speak Hebrew, which I don't know that any of us do, you can still get the sense of what's going on as you see the interaction between the higher voices and the lower voices, and the percussion and the harp and the soprano, the voice. It originally was a boy soprano to sound like the young King David himself calling the sheep and things like that. And there's just a lot of it's timeless but contemporary and very evocative, very dramatic type of piece.
And I think overall too, like that's how music functions. You don't necessarily need to know all of the fine details to have an enjoyable experience. Like it's the music is the conduit in which you take somebody's experience, so to speak, based on their experiences and how they wrote the music, and then performing it again is not time travel per se, but you get to experience that in some shape or form.
Yeah, and it's always the question of how conscious is a composer that every decision is influenced because of this or because of that. But one of the things we do as musicians or like as a conductor is knowing some of Bernstein's life, you see that tension and balance. So he was in his 20s, remarkable, hired as one of the conductors of the New York Philharmonic. And then in his early 30s, he wrote West Side Story. I mean,
yowzers, I have to step my game up.
And at some point, he had this tension. Am I going to be a classical music conductor? Am I going to be a classical music composer? Am I going to be a music theater composer? And his solution was to never really find one or the other, but the tension of them to be balanced. He was also an amazing teacher. He had lots of instructions about talking about music and philosophy, and he was a conductor and a composer and a pianist. And I think he was great at so many of them because he leaned into that tension. Let's not be music theater or classical music. Let's not be a conductor or a composer. Let's see if all of those things can come together.
Okay, so that whole theme of tension is really, it's prevalent throughout him in his true essence. That's
correct. So did he? And this was written in 1965. So he had written the Chadash Symphony in 1963.
I mean, of course, I think we all probably knew that,
right? So this was sort of the period, where he was really exploring some of the elements of his Jewish heritage and traditions, because that's also includes Hebrew text. But for perspective, it was only 8 years before that he wrote West Side Story. So it's he's truly a man of the world. But you can see now, did he consciously say, because I feel a tension between my American heritage and my Jewish heritage, I'm going to write parallel minor sevenths between the tenor and the bass? Maybe, we have no idea. But sort of those things of like a different way of thinking about what should be the shape of a melody be, what should the sound of harmony be, reflected sort of a different perspective. Like Maria, those opening two notes, I know of almost no other songs in the history of classical music or musical theater that use that interval. Because for hundreds of years, music theorists and the church said that was the devil's interval.
Do they call that a triad?
A tritone.
Tritone, sorry, yeah.
Right? And Bernstein said, how about if that's the opening of a love ballad?
You'll have to refresh my memory on this one. Has the chorale done this one before? And regardless if we have, long before my time, I'm sure. What was the choice to do it for the first time or again?
Yeah, the chorale, according to the records that I can find, chorale last did this in 2003. I've done the piece a couple times. I remember doing parts of it in college, and it's always been one of my pieces that it's like, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, because it's not like candy, some it just sounds lovely. It really is very poignant and beautiful, but it's always been kind of like I want to come back to that again.
It's a nice dish you want to eat every now and then because the flavors are so...
If you think of it in terms of food, yeah. And I thought it provided a nice contrast with some of the other pieces that we're doing for the concert. So the other major work that we're doing is the Fauré Requiem. So this summer, as I was thinking about these things, I was like, Fauré Requiem and the Bernstein Chichester Psalms. It's an odd pairing. Even the orchestra it's not the same players. So after we decided that, then a couple months later, we're doing this project where we're trying to collect all the old chorale programs. And someone brings in a chorale program, and this ties back to you don't make a conscious choice, but you're influenced by things. So for years and years and years, I was Dudley's assistant. So his approach and thoughts on music just permeate into me. It turns
Wait,
out
I've pumped the brakes. So you were Dudley's assistant. So that basically, in essence, I am the young you.
no, I played piano and was also in the chorale. So
Okay,
you
dodged a
just
bullet.
play the drums.
Dodged a bullet. We're all good,
okay,
folks.
yeah.
No need for concern.
So I picked Fauré Requiem and Bernstein Chichester Psalms, and we're filling out with the rest of the concert. When we're also doing this project to collect the old programs, so we know what the chorale has done. Someone brings in a program from 1992, before I was even out of college, and Dudley had programmed the Fauré Requiem and the Bernstein Chichester Psalms on the same program for the All Saints 1992. So 30 years later, almost to the day, we're doing the same concert, and we didn't even know about it. It's one of those, the whole universe tying back together. That was really kind of,
Yeah, it's too much in line for it to be just a coincidence sort of thing. Yeah,
it's sort of one of those things where you see a glimpse of those things. It was just kind of fascinating to me. So I mean, the Fauré Requiem and the Bernstein Chichester Psalms are things I've known and done at different times or heard, and so it was just kind of fascinating to see the program to go. So somewhere in the back of my head, Dudley and I must have had a conversation about this sometime last 30 years. I don't know.
30 years. That's astounding to me. And I think too, not to blow any names, blow anybody's cover, but I think there's a fair number of singers that are still, they would have sung this 30 years ago, and they're singing.
Oh yeah,
it now.
We looked at the list of singers, and there was names we recognized.
Yeah. So I mean,
they were a lot younger then.
Well, maybe not a lot. I mean, if 30 is old, then I'm old.
Stop. Right? So I wouldn't have even been at that program because I was still in college in 92. But yeah, there were several people on the list who sang that program. And I don't think any of them ever remembered the two pieces being put together. So
Tom Hamilton probably knows.
Yep.
He's an encyclopedia.
Yep. So we'll talk more in the next one about the Fauré Requiem, which forms a big part of this program. But part of the motivation for that was Fauré was an organist, and he just had to play the mass of so many funerals. But at the time, the funeral music was all proscribed. It's exactly the same. He said, I could do it in my sleep. I just wanted something that was a little bit more poignant and reflective. And he had experienced the loss of his mother and father in the year or two before he wrote this. And so he emphasizes the peace element and the dramatic element of the Requiem, which is a mass for the dead, and takes out the whole hell and death and storms and all that kind of stuff, and just goes much more for the calm and the hope part of it. So,
absolutely. So if this this year's Songs of Healing and Hope concert, maybe it's an audience member's first time seeing the chorale, what do you hope that they take away from this experience?
It's a great question. I haven't actually thought of it. One of the challenges you have as a performer is you're so geared to what are you and the other performers going to take away from it. You don't think about it as from the audience perspective, but that I guess this whole perspective of in the midst of pain and suffering and grief, and as we search for healing, there's also so many different ways of thinking about hope and resolution, and that the act of 100 people singing and 20 people playing instruments from completely different perspectives are united around this idea of trying to lean into the tension to find that balance, to aim for some glimpse of beauty, whatever that might be.
Especially when it seems like it's not there, or it seems next to impossible to find.
Right.
I would say.
Yeah. So even the concept of the concert, healing and hope, has this sort of tension and balance.
Interesting take on the title. I've not considered that.
It's sort of like when people talk about peace. Well, is peace the absence of violence or the absence of war? Or is it a deeper idea that peace is when there's a shared understanding and common purpose and direction?
The thing too, and it's an active seeking of. It's not a one moment, and it's not a stagnant
right
concept. You have to work at it.
Peace comes to you, but you also have to go looking for it.
Yes.
Yeah. So again, that whole idea of tension and balance, and Bernstein in his education and talking about music really helped us go back and look at some of the older classical music composers, and he was a huge advocate of the music of Gustav Mahler, and to think of these more modern concepts of tension and balance, and how do we find that in the music of Beethoven or the music of Mahler and things like that. So he was legendary both in his education and training on this, and also how he brought that into his own performance and conducting. That, it's no coincidence that when the Berlin Wall fell, East and West joined together to do Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy, and Bernstein was the conductor. It was just the bringing together of all the parts of humanity that are reflected in how he conducted and composed, and how we hope we can bring forth in our attempt.
Excellent. So you want to tell the audience, the viewers, when is this happening? Songs of Healing and Hope. Give us the details. Do you remember them?
That's what you're for.
Okay, Songs of Healing and Hope.
Songs of Healing and Hope it's in October.
October 15th at 2 p.m. at the Walther Theater here on the St. Norbert campus. Tickets are on sale now. You can head over to birdercorral.com to purchase those. We have a great buy two get one discount going currently, so feel free to bring friends and family and enjoy the reduced overall cost. It's going to be a great evening. Afternoon. Thank you. 2:00. Yes.
Yep. 2:00. And what does the audience hope? We always hope that they take out of it like, oh, the chorale's so good, I want to give them money. No. Or
join the chorale.
Do another, or come to another concert. But, just going back to, you said, what do I hope the audience gets out of it, is that there's something transformative, magical, maybe hopeful about watching people do things that they love to do. Like the chorale has some professional musicians in it, and a lot of people that aren't professional musicians from all walks of life, all careers, and they actually pay money to have to go through rehearsals.
I think it's they get to go through rehearsals.
Oh yes, they get to go to rehearsals. But these are people that love this, and they're trying to connect to it. And there's something for the audience of being in a space where other people are experiencing something beyond themselves that is inspiring to them.
Yeah. And the folks, again, going back to the ones that have been here for many years, I think it's just a testament to how important that feeling and existing in that space is.
Yeah. Because, if we want to get really metaphysical and things like that, the choir is the ultimate expression of tension and balance between the individuals and their section, and between the four sections and the sound of the choir, and between what the conductor wants and what the composer and the performers want. So there's that tension and balance that creates something that's synergistically greater than the sum of its parts.
And I think that's the title of our episode today, is tension and balance. That
It seems to be, yeah.
Recurring theme.
Bernstein used those terms quite a lot and things like that. So
lovely. I think that wraps it up.
Fantastic.
Don't forget to like, share,
post, comment. I don't know what else.
Tweet, link it in.
TikTok it.
TikTok it. Yeah.
Do we have TikTok?
No.
Okay. I still think of that as an analog clock. So.